Welcome to Module 5, the Fluency module. Go ahead and open up to your student packet and take the Fluency pretest. Pause the video, and when you're ready, resume. As you can see, we are now on the third part of the reading pyramid. We've tackled phonological awareness, phonics, and fluency is often thought of the third and final foundational skill of reading. You can also see that we're still at the bottom half of Scarborough's reading rope. We now want this to be accurate and fluent decoding and encoding. Let's get started. Fluency is thought of the bridge between phonics and comprehension. If students are laboriously decoding word by word, by the time they get to the end of a sentence, or especially the end of a paragraph, their comprehension suffers. They need to have accurate, fluent reading in order for that comprehension to take place. So we're going to go through exactly the same way that we've done with the other skills, and we're going to talk about what fluency is, why it's important, how we teach it, how we assess it, how we remediate it, and action plans that you might need to take in your class. So what is fluency? Fluency is the ability to read accurately with ease, expression, and appropriate pacing. There has been a lot of research about the importance of accuracy in recent years. And just like we have phonological awareness and phonics continuum, we also have a continuum of skills from simple to complex when it comes to fluency. So we first have to have solid phonological awareness. We have to have alphabetic principle, and we have to be able to read CVC words in single, multisyllabic, and finally adding that automaticity as we go up the continuum. Complex skills require time and practice. Think about things like playing the piano, or juggling, or learning to drive. We want to tune in to those micro skills of each skill and practice and become fluent. However, this is where we often stop. Once a student reaches second grade and can accurately and fluently decode at that level, we often just think that our job is done. But if we were going to be a pianist and play a Mozart or a Beethoven or a symphony, or we were going to do rigorous mountain driving or juggling at a higher skill, we would have to continually practice those skills, those more advanced patterns, just as much as we had at hot cross buns or driving slowly and cautiously through a neighborhood, right? The National Reading Panel in 2000 did a giant assessment of all of the reading research to give an accurate representation of what reading instruction should look like. And that's how the 5 components of reading were born. Fluency was definitely one of the top facets of reading instruction, and these are the best ways to teach fluency: repeated reading, oral or choral reading, paired reading, and radio reading. We're going to talk through each of those in this module. Fluency has come under fire. When I started teaching in 2003, there were lots of programs that focused reading remediation on just fluency. And they often had stopwatches and timers and graphs, and the whole entire point was to be faster. This has come under fire because what happened with those programs is that teachers and students began to think that faster was better, that the words per minute, that the rate became the most important thing. And the truth of the matter is that rate and speed is not the most important thing. Instead, we want to have this idea. We want to know that students need to be accurate and fluent in order to have fluency. So we want them to be reading correctly at an appropriate rate. But we also need them to have expressiveness and phrasing, and we most importantly need to tune in that comprehension and connection is always the end game. I like this chart from Dibble's 8th edition. I like it for 2 reasons. First, we have to know where our students should be. In 8th grade, approximately how fluent is appropriate. And I also like this chart because it takes into account accuracy. It's not just about how many words a student reads per minute, but it's about how many correct words that student reads. So let's talk about how we teach fluency. For years, we would just give students passages, and we would have them read passages, and we would give a score of accuracy and fluency for that passage. The problem is that accuracy and fluency actually need to start way before the passage level. We need to make sure that students are accurate and fluent at the sound level, at the word level, at the phrase level, and at the sentence level before we give them those passages. So that's where the continuum comes in. If you have a student who's struggling at passage level or at text level, backing up to those predetermined skills is going to be hugely impactful. One of the resources that you'll find in Moodle is blending lines. And if you look for blending lines, we often connect these to the patterns of phonics that they're currently learning. So in this, the first line is single syllable words following the A-I-A-Y pattern. And then we go to multisyllabic words. We go to words that have morphemes attached. And we go to words that have higher syllabication, or we could say are challenge words. And we always constantly want to review and in the end with connection of meaning, which means we put those words in a sentence. These are editable templates that you can find in Moodle. Just like all of the other skills that we've learned, sometimes students need explicit, direct instruction. They don't just naturally pick up things that we might assume that they do. Phrasing and expression and tuning into punctuation are great examples of when this needs explicit instruction in fluency. Let me model this for you. When I'm speaking, I'm naturally scooping up phrases, most often related to syntax. I often give you the subject, and then the predicate, and then finish the thought. Look what happens when I read, instead of by reading phrases, if I read word by word. A boy named Robbie has a rare disease. His bones are brittle and break easily. Robbie has had more than 70 broken bones and 13 surgeries. He was adopted at 9 years ago. Through all his struggles, Robbie had a positive attitude. His brother made videos of him that became famous. It's so choppy and robotic that it breaks down your comprehension, right? So instead, I want to teach students that when we read, we need to add those natural phrases. Look at the difference. A boy named Robbie has a rare disease. His bones are brittle and break easily. It's hugely important. And part of that phrasing is that we teach students how syntax and how sentences work. We also want to have them tune into the punctuation. How many of your students just run over a period, right? They take breaths at random times and it makes that sentences disjointed and you're like, what even just happened there, right? So we need to teach them with explicit direct instruction what we do when we see a period, what we do when we see a comma or an exclamation point, how our voice naturally raises a little bit when we have a question mark at the end. So those explicit instruction makes a huge difference to comprehension. And finally, we want to show that expression builds comprehension. We're not just reading everything in a loud, excited voice. We want our expression to match what's happening in the story. My favorite way to teach expression, even to older kids, is by doing this activity with a book called Yo, Yes. Listen to this. Yo, yes. Hey, who? You, me. Yes, you, oh. What's up? Not much. Why? No fun. Oh, no friends. Oh, yes. Look, Me, you. Yes, you. Yes, me. You? Well, well. Yes. Yo, yes. Yow. That didn't make any sense at all, right? But now, watch what happens when I match my expression to what's happening in the story. Yo. Yes. Hey. Who? You. Me? Yes, you. Oh. What's up? Not much. Why? No fun. Oh? No friends. Oh. Yes. Look. Me. You? Yes, me. You. Well? Well. Yes. Yo. Yes. Yo. Just this 2 or 3 minute story can show kids how important expression is, right? That the story totally changed, and all I did was match my expression using the punctuation to match what was happening in this story. You can also do this by giving them things to read with punctuation marks that they don't have to decode or think about at all as far as content. So you can do this with alphabet or numbers or colors and have them just tune in to the punctuation marks and match their voice to the punctuation. And you can have them write their own with colors or numbers or animals, and then that gives them that cognition to tune into punctuation, because punctuation builds comprehension. There is also a story in Moodle that I will link, and it is about a high school teacher that taught punctuation, and one of her students was like, you've got to respect the period, and it changed their classroom dynamic around reading using punctuation mark. Teaching syntax is huge when it comes to fluency and comprehension. Let me show you what I mean. If I said to you, Ryan just inherited $2 million, what would your questions be? Maybe, who is Ryan? How did he inherit the $2 million, right? What if I said to you, Ryan, my stepbrother, just inherited $2 million? I've now given this sentence a positive phrase. I lean forward and I oppose that part of the sentence that is a natural definition. And now it's given you much more information and comprehension about this sentence. However, these appositive phrases take place all the time in older students' literature, even in intermediate student literature, and we never teach kids how to read it. So looking at these excerpts from Esperanza Rising, if I never taught a student about appositive phrases or how to fluently read them, it might sound something like this. Esperanza's parents, Ramono and Sexto Ortego, stood nearby. And you're like, wait, what even just happened, right? But if I teach students to say, Alfonso was el jefe, the boss, and Papa's closest companion, and I teach them that when they see those commas, they pause, they give that further information, and then they sit back in and read the sentence as normal, then comprehension is completely aided. So, distracted, Mama paced at the window, each step making a little tapping sound on the tile. Sounds completely different than if I just read that and ignored those commas. That comprehension will break down. We also need to teach students how to read dialogue, which we rarely talk about. We talk about dialogue only in the context of their writing dialogue, but we don't often stop to teach kids how to read dialogue. So there are some great multisensory activities that you can actually teach kids about the tagline and how we pause and how we match our expression to what that person would actually be saying in the context of the story or what they're saying in the book. Okay, let's talk about how we teach kids to be fluent. If we give them some basic lessons about prosody and punctuation and fluency, then we also want to give them ample opportunity to practice those. And the National Reading Panel and several studies since then have shown that repeated readings are the #1 way to build accurate, fluent reading with students of all ages. So if we just read something one time, which we often do when we're reading novels or textbooks at higher grades, then they never get the opportunity to practice those nuances of expression and tuning into punctuation. So we say that when we're working on fluency, when we're doing repeated reading for fluency practice, we want to read a text 4 times. The first time we're going to read just for accuracy. We're just figuring out the words in the sentence. The second time, we want to make sure that we're reading at a pace that builds comprehension. We're not reading robot word by word, and we're tuning in to that meaning. The third time, we're going to really make sure that our phrasing is correct and we're tuning into punctuation, and that punctuation will help us in the end, our fourth read, be our final product or our final performance, and we want to make sure that expression is there that matches the text. Repeated reading has been tested over and over again, and the meta-analysis ranks that repeated reading is one of the most influential things that we can do to help a student become a more fluent reader. How do we get older students when we most likely would not repeat the chapter in a textbook? We most likely would not reread a page in a novel. How do we find time to build in this fluency or this repeated practice? One of my favorite ways to do it is to take a novel like this example of Escape by Night, and then I built some fluency passages around the content of that novel. So that novel took place during the Civil War. It was all about a little boy in the South meeting a Yankee soldier and not knowing that he was a Yankee. And so I knew that my students would have to understand what a rebel and a Yankee was and connected to that time period. So I built some passages around that we could keep our momentum in the novel, but still have a weekly repeated reading passage that's building background knowledge and vocabulary while they're building fluency. There are great readers' theaters that are made for older students. You can even create them yourself using ChatGPT. You could do poetry slams. Poetry is a great way for students to practice repeating a poem until they're accurate and fluent and read it like a poem. And we have in Moodle a couple of fluency resources for poetry slams. And then we have another one called radio reading, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But basically that is you give children a text ahead of time and let them practice it multiple times before they have to read it out loud or perform it. One of my very favorite things is to do a red carpet and have students get a passage or to practice. I love doing this with some kind of syntax context. So maybe that week we're working on appositive phrases. So I have each student take a paragraph that has appositive phrases and they get to practice it. And then at the end of the week, we have an Oscar contest where several students stand up, they read their passage. The person that is voted, it's always a silent vote. The person that is voted the winner of that week gets to walk down the red carpet and get a picture with the Oscar. And then I always email home and just say your child's the world's greatest reader, won for accurate, fluent reading this week. So we want to give students practice with those advanced sentence structures. And this is a really fun, engaging way to do that. Let's talk about choral reading. Choral reading is often done in kindergarten, first, second grade, and that's when the whole class reads out loud together. But we often drop that out in third grade, right? Third, fourth, fifth grade, we don't do a lot of choral reading. Choral reading is beneficial for many reasons. Here's a couple of them. First, less skilled readers get a chance to practice and gain support with a text before they read independently. Maybe they get to read chorally with a teacher or a small group before they go back to independently reading and answering questions. Choral reading improves all students, promoting engagement. So not just one student is reading and everyone else is thinking about lunch or doodling or completely disengaged. It requires complete engagement. And finally, it models prosody and the cadence. Some students just naturally read very choppy, and this gives them the opportunity to practice that cadence or that prosody of what fluent reading sounds like. It also helps students who are struggling with decoding a word not get hung up on decoding that word so long that they lose the meaning or the comprehension of that sentence or passage. Let's talk about paired reading or partner reading. Paired reading and partner reading has also had a lot of success, proven success in research. There is a study that I have put in Moodle from Matthew Burns, and he did an entire study with partner reading or paired reading. And how he did it was he took the entire class and assessed their accuracy and fluency and ranked them from the top reader to the most struggling reader. And he took that class roster and he divided it in half. And instead of taking the top reader with the bottom reader, because that's obviously going to be a big discrepancy, instead he took the top reader with the top reader of the bottom half. So still we had one more skilled reader than the other. We still had a discrepancy in their skills, but it wasn't quite as large. And then they had repeated reading and they had specific tasks that they were going to do. Who read first, who read second, the question and answer. And it was a really powerful study that had a great effect size on increasing an entire class's reading fluency and comprehension. So check that out. Radio reading I talked a little bit about, but this is when instead of popcorn cold reading, I say popcorn Jamie, and Jamie has to suddenly feel all the pressure and panic and anxiety of reading out loud in front of her class. Most kids don't like that, and especially students who are struggling or feeling inadequate as readers, it is highly anxiety provoking. So radio reading is a way that you can still get voices in the room, you can still have students reading out loud, but it takes away that anxiety. I would give them a passage and say, Jamie, you're going to read passage 3, Chris, you're going to read paragraph 4, and then I give them the opportunity to practice it 3 or 4 times. They now can figure out the words they don't know. They can figure out their phrasing and tune into punctuation and get expressive. And then when I call on them, it's not a surprise and they can feel confident and less anxious. So radio reading is a great exercise that then it is almost like they only have their final performance that's public. Here's a great fluency instructional routine. So I first read the text out loud to students. I do this in several ways. It could be a history textbook or passage from science. It could be the passage that is the decodable connected text in our phonics program. So I'm going to read it so students can hear it read accurately and fluently. Then I'm going to pause and I'm going to teach the background knowledge and the vocabulary, the words that they might not know, or the context of the story. Then we're going to read it chorally with students until the students sound fluent. And then students read independently and practice to perfection. Okay, so how do we assess fluency? How do we know where our students are and where they should be? There are several reading fluency assessments out there. I like the DIBELS 8, which gives grade level passages and that normed data. So you know exactly where they're falling according to or against their peers, right? You know if they're below or on grade level or above grade level. You can also monitor their progress using DIBELS 8. So if you assess them, they're below benchmark, you make sure that you're teaching the phonetic patterns that they don't know so they can build that accuracy. I make sure that if it is they're falling down on multisyllabic words, I'm giving them instruction on how to decode multisyllabic words. I give that instruction first. I always focus on I want to make sure that I'm giving them the instruction that will help them become accurate first. And then I give them the fluency lessons. I teach them the sentences and the prosody and the phrasing. And then I can monitor their progress over time as we do all of those for repeated reading, choral reading, paired reading, and radio reading. Let's take a look at a couple of the DIBELS assessments. So for this student, this is a third grade beginning of year assessment. So BOY means beginning of year, not boy. And if I look at this, I can tell based on the little runner on the right, I can tell where he is or where she is based on fluency, based on accuracy, and based on comprehension. So you can see that the little runner is, for fluency, almost to benchmark. For accuracy, from red to yellow, so well below benchmark, approaching. And then comprehension is actually really good. So my question to you is, looking at this assessment, what would you do? Where would you start your instruction? If you said you would start your instruction with phonics-based skills and getting them to be accurate, then you are 100% correct. If you can look at the words that this student is missing, they're often multisyllabic words, so I would make sure that they can read single syllable words within those patterns, but also have a strategy to tackle multisyllabic words. I would also make sure that I tune into where their error pattern is. So not just whether they missed that word, but why did they miss that word? Are they leaving off endings or morphemes? Or are they mixing up vowel sounds? So I would tune in and make notes about exactly what their error patterns were. And I would teach those phonics skills before I would ever worry about how many words correct this student read. Let's take a look at another one. This is a middle of the year 5th grade student. What would your strategy be for this student? This student, accuracy is approaching yellow, fluency is approaching yellow, and comprehension is approaching green. But take a look for a second. This is very fascinating because this student only missed 3 words, and 2 of the 3 words were not even multisyllabic. So this is telling me that this student is reading slowly and laboriously and didn't read enough words that even their 3 errors knocked down their accuracy. So this student is reading fairly accurately, but their fluency isn't there and it's dragging down their comprehension. So for this student, I might do some interventions with fluency, like choral reading or tuning in to teaching them how to scoop, or especially repeated reading. Let's talk about remediation. So if you've identified a student that really does struggle with fluency, how do you remediate? Remediation is not seat work. In fact, there's some programs where students put headphones on and they listen to passages and then they practice them and they do it completely independently. And I would argue that this is not a great intervention, because what if that student is practicing it incorrectly? What if they're not decoding accurately and they're just practicing that wrong? Or what if they're choppy and they're still just practicing, they're getting faster at word by word reading? So fluency is not seat work. It involves modeling, coaching, cueing, explaining, correcting, encouraging, and careful selection of reading material. Let's talk about remediation. We know that whole group, we need to teach the skill if 80% or more of our students need it. So maybe our whole group instruction revolves around complex sentence structure. But if we have students that need true remediation at below grade level skills, then here are the 4 things we need to keep in mind. We want to focus on accuracy before fluency. We want to know and teach students that faster is not better. We're not trying to read as fast as we possibly can. Speed is an indicator that there might be something wrong. Just like if you're driving down the highway and you see someone going 20 miles an hour down the left lane, you know that something is not right. But if you see someone going 120 miles per hour, that isn't necessarily better, right? So faster isn't better. We also want to practice fluency at all levels. So if a student is struggling at passage level, back it up and practice at sentence level. If a student is struggling with fluently reading sentences, back it up and let them read phrases. If a student is struggling with phrases, go to the word level. And if they're struggling with words, you might even need to go back and teach them sound and symbol correspondence. And finally, you can make it fun. So we often think of fluency practice as just rote reading. We're going to read for 1 minute. We have a stopwatch. We're timing it. We're drawing a chart about it. We can bring this to life with all of those examples of ways to make it fun. Number of correct repetitions needs to be automized or gain orthographic mapping. We talked about orthographic mapping when we talked about phonics. This is when you know something automatically. You don't have to stop to figure it out. Like 1 + 1 is 2. I don't actually have to do the math anymore. It just pops in my mind. And we want word level accuracy to be orthographically mapped. We want words to be known on sight. So we're not memorizing sight words or high frequency words. What we mean by sight words is any word that student owns, any word that student doesn't have to decode. If you see CAT, cat just pops into your mind and you're not blending sounds together. What our ultimate goal is that we automize reading. We want them to just quickly and fluently go through a sentence, and none of those words, or very few of those words, have to be sounded out or decoded. And that can be way different for students who reading comes easily to, for those that reading comes more challenging to, right? So for advanced learners, it might be 1 to 2 repetitions. They can read accurately and fluently the first time. For average learners, it takes 4 to 14 repetitions for that orthographic mapping to take place. And for struggling readers or readers with dyslexia or other reading disabilities, it could take 20 to 200 repetitions for them to get that automaticity. So we want to give explicit direct instruction. We want to monitor progress and celebrate that progress along the way, but we want to talk about accuracy and fluency and comprehension. Take out your fluency pretest and let's see how much you learned. Number 1, fluency can be defined as the ability to read accurately and automatically with prosody and expression at a rate that doesn't interfere with comprehension. The answer is D, all of the above. Number 2, reading fluently is important because A, it allows the reader to concentrate on meaning of the text. It supports working memory. It lessens the cognitive load, allowing space for thought, questioning, and enjoyment. The answer is D, all of the above. Number 3, a teacher should focus on A, accuracy before fluency. Number 4, fluency is important at all stages, K through 12th grade. C. Number 5, a formula for accuracy is accuracy plus rate equals fluency. That is true, but we also want to make sure that we're adding prosody, expression, and comprehension to that. Number 6, rereading is an effective way to build fluency, but only when constructive feedback is given. True. Number 7, fluency programs can be a great way for students to build fluency independently. False. They need that constructive feedback. Number 8, fluency should be taught at the sound, word, phrase, sentence, passage level. All of the above, especially if a student is struggling. Obviously, if they're not struggling, you don't need to go back to those primary ways, but if they're struggling, you definitely do. Number 9, radio reading is better alternative to round robin or popcorn reading because students get a chance to practice the passage before performance is required. And number 10, prosody is important to teach because it aids in meaning. Number 10, prosody is important to teach because it aids meaning making and comprehension. All right, you've done it. Another module down. I'll see you next time for vocabulary.